Rocking and rolling, another Tuesday. This is Nuance, as we call it. I'm Mike Scala, and I'm joined by Jay Carter, who is the chair of BLM Tokyo and the hip hop artist Timid. And Jay actually looks like he might be frozen in time. Is Jay still with us? Might need to log back in here. I think we lost Jay. That's all right. I'm sure Jay will be back shortly. In the meantime, we have another guest with us. This week, we have Dan Guarino, a man of many titles. He is a reporter, an actor, an author, amongst many things. How are you, Dan?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you to yourself and Jay for inviting me on this evening.
Yes, absolutely. You're a real Renaissance man. You know, I was called that recently, but you might have me beat there. I love it, though. I love it. It looks like Jay might be back with us. Jay, how you doing?
Oh, man, it's a day of technical difficulties, it seems.
Yeah, well, that's all right. It seems like we're back on, so hopefully we stay on.
We're all together.
Yes, we are. I was mentioning to you, Dan, before, I have an autographed copy of your book, Broad Channel Through Time.
Thank you.
It's a great coffee table book. I really enjoy it.
Appreciate that. That was quite enjoyable to work on. That's it's a series where they take a particular place. It's actually a publisher in England that contacted me about doing something for this series, and they compare the present day to historical past. What has changed, what has been the same, and one of the nice things about this book, which is in color, which is great, is that I got to do pretty much all of the current day photography for it as well. My first book I did with my late wife, Images of America Broad Channel, that was 197 historical images altogether. First published history about Broad Channel, which was great. And as I say, this kind of was fun here. And just to introduce that a little bit, people always ask me about the background behind me because nobody wants to see my fridge or my stove. So I'm just going to lean out of the shot. And for people who aren't familiar, that's Broad Channel. That's actually a few blocks from where I live. It's a small island community within New York City. It's in the middle of Jamaica Bay, the last inhabited island, Jamaica Bay, and just south of mainland Queens and just slightly north of Rockaway Beach and just a little off to one direction or another from Kennedy Airport. So
that's right. It's a real hidden gem. A lot of people don't realize they're in New York City still.
Absolutely. People will always ask, is that New York City? New York City is such a great variety of everything from skyscrapers to surfing beaches. And you really look around and say, that's really all here. It's in the city that I live in, I've grown up in. It's an amazing.
I was just the same thing. I was like, where is that? Is that upstate? Is that Long Island? What is that?
Yeah. And I actually shot this. A company in England was working on a documentary for the Smithsonian Channel about the Prohibition era and specifically in New York City. Broad Channel was a major center of that. It was called Little Cuba because there was all kinds of speakeasies, illegal liquor and such going through here and so on. So I went out and took a few shots for them and said, well, if you're going to come down and film for this series for Smithsonian, here's some of the scenics, the things that might look, fit picture-wise for you, some good visuals. So there's this, and they also then to this into a Rockaway Times photo contest, and it made the top 30, which was nice. So.
Very nice. And you also are involved with the Rockaway Theater Company. So
yes.
A little bit about that. By the way, I saw a video recently on YouTube where I believe it was called I'll Kick Your Ass. I showed it to Jay as well. Mm-hmm. The Rockaway Theater Company several years ago. What did it Wow.
I'm not sure if that was, that may have been a director and addressing the actors about really remembering their lines. Yeah, it's funny you should ask because, we worry about one of the health concerns, mental health, is memory loss. And I think we just need to find a way to inject Facebook into everybody's head because I'm constantly getting, here's a memory from whatever years ago. It's like, I forgot I did that. So it just came up today, something I posted 6 years ago about the first full theater production that I was in. To backtrack, I mean, yes, I was in a few plays in grade school, and I did a guest spot with RTC where they were doing a kind of every performance, they had a different guest person pop into this role. But 6 years ago, and I was president of the Rockaway Artists Alliance. Took that up after the hurricane, and I was doing a show I was playing and singing. That's what I do, and had organized this whole program, this variety program. And one of my friends from the theater tapped me and said, how come you never told us about the singing and playing thing? I was like, and she said, how come you've never been in any of our shows? And I was like, uh-huh. And she said, well, I'm doing a show now and you're in it. Now, before, I'd always looked at the theater. I said, that's really cool. It's amazing. I will never be a part of that. But here I was in my first full theater production. And not only that, I wasn't somebody in the background. It was, not one of the stars, but what they call a featured player. So with a partner, I had specific dialogue. I had a song and a dance to learn, and this is all new to me. I actually had to learn singing, for instance, for the theater, and it was just an amazing experience. And I'm thinking, what am I doing here? But I'm looking around saying, well, I guess I'm in the best of hands. And these people taught me how to do this. The show went off. As a matter of fact, our song ended with 4 people doing 3 different songs in 3 different tempos and winding up at the same time with that big, stick your hands out moment. And that was Stephen Sondheim's Follies show. And now it's 6 years and I am on my 10th show. And I've had the opportunity to do shows in Staten Island, in Manhattan. Manhattan, I actually got to act the part of a stand-up comedian, which I've done anyhow. And the Rockaway Theater Company, which has been great. And I've learned everything and worked on everything from set building to being a stagehand to being out there and being a singer and a dancer and all those things. And right now, we are in rehearsals for, after helping out the last show, a comedy called What the Rabbi Saw, where I was a kind of pre-show photographer. And now we are in rehearsals for Kiss Me Kate, which is a Cole Porter musical that opens in July. So it's kind of like, it's funny that show, that my first show has come up now when I'm in the midst of doing my 10th show. Probably would have been a couple more if not for the pandemic, somewhere in between there. And I have had a blast, and I'm still, even on the other side of the curtain of the stage, like, wow, this is really cool. This is amazing. And I get to work with some really talented and wonderful people, fantastic people.
Absolutely. And if someone wants to get involved in the Rockaway Theater Company, where should they go?
Yeah, the 2 places you can go are the Facebook page, Rockaway Theater Company, and theater is with the RE at the end instead of the ER, or rockawaytheatercompany.org. And you can find out, well, there's a few things you can find out. You can find out about all the shows that are coming up this year, which is a fantastic achievement by itself, because basically I was in 2 years ago-ish, I was in a production of Jesus Christ Superstar, playing a villain for the first time. And that's when the pandemic set through. A week before opening, we were like, okay, everything is postponed. We don't know how for long, but there we are. But so this is actually their first full season since the last one ended in 2019. So there's a list of shows you can come out and enjoy. It's really, I say this as an audience member, fantastic theater, really enjoyable, very reasonably priced. And then you can also get involved. And being involved, I know the length and breadth of being involved in nonprofit things. Certainly at the Rockaway Artists, like it was 24/8 being involved. But you can be involved a little bit, a lot. You can come down and help paint, build things, be in a cast. You can audition for roles because they are open to anybody who wants to come in and audition for it. So it really runs the range. You can be an usher. You can, when there's concession, you can help work that. Or just come down and explore and see what you might like, or just play and enjoy it, which is the great thing about it.
Yeah, I think it's awesome because a lot of people think in New York City you got to go to Broadway to see a show, but you have local shows too. So support your local theater companies like the Rockaway Theater Company, doing great things right over here.
Yeah, and they have a beautiful theater. It's out in Rockaway. It's out towards the western end of Rockaway, towards Breezy Point, and it's in a national park of all things, a spot called Fort Tilden. Beautiful area, historically, nature-wise, community activities, sports, things like that. There's a beach along the way, but please don't park in the parking lot for that. Just a warning. And they have a full theater. It used to be part of the military, installation there, and they've redone it into a whole working theater, which is, a great place in itself. They did some internal renovations for it. So it's very, very nice place, very comfortable, and just super. It's a fully functional theater. No, amazing.
That theater is one of those things that I'd be nervous to do. Like you and I, Mike, been on tons of different stages. We've done extra work for TV shows and been in films or commercial type of thing. But with recording on film, there's the cuts and the takes and this and that. But with theater, like, you have to do that live in front of people. You can't mess up and there be like, cut, let's do it again, because you're right there, live.
How many live shows have we done? It's the same kind of deal. You improvise.
You do, but it's actually, it's funny because I learned that in that first production where there was a minor glitch and a major one. And now I had been on stage before. I mean, I totally started with stage fright as a spoken word performer doing my poetry, kind of graduated to singing and playing and hosting things like that along the way, and stand-up comedy in Manhattan. But this is a whole new thing. So the first go around, my stage partner and I, who to this day, I guess we acted so well, people still think we were actually married, which we're not. But we were supposed to come out and we're talking to a third person, because otherwise you're just talking to air, explaining stuff to nobody. And the actor who's supposed to be talking to us was on the other side of the stage. And I'm thinking, before we start off, there is no way she's going to be able to get across the stage and be there for us to talk to. So as the other bit is going on, before we come out, I went to somebody in the back and said, listen, how would you like to be a star for about 5 seconds? Said, all you've got to do is walk with us, look at us while we're talking, just nod. So we went up and we're saying da 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 da. Oh, we used to be da 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 da, and it went off saying this. But that was the minor glitch, and the major one was when there was a fire in on the Brooklyn side of the Gil Hodges Bridge. So they shut down the roadway, and this is before an afternoon performance. And the problem was that there was a good chunk of the cast that was on the other side of the bridge, and the band and background players who were not going to be able to make it. We didn't know, are they going to get through? Are they going to get through it all? So there's an afternoon audience waiting and waiting, and we don't know what's going to happen. And then somebody said, well, maybe some of us could go out, volunteer to go out in front of the curtain and just entertain. And we said, okay, that's a good idea, since the theme of the show was kind of a variety thing anyway. But they said, listen, the band doesn't have your music, so either you have your own or you don't have anything. And I don't know why, but I said, new kid on the block said, I'll go. So I came out, and other people came out. They did singing, they did dancing. A lot of people had seen Hamilton, so they did whole bits out of that, which is great. Just totally off the cuff. And I came out and I did my patter, told some jokes, and then I did the song yesterday, told the a cappella, and then off I went again. So and talking to the director, a lovely woman named Peggy Page, and I mentioned this, she said, and that's the joy of doing live theater. You really never know what's going to happen and what you're going to have to juggle and deal with. So it's it's funny that it comes from that show also. And along the way, it's like, stuff happens, you just roll with it. But it is an adjustment, and it is something to go out and say, okay, I'm gonna have to go out and do this in front of a whole bunch of people, and hit the mark, say the words, being point in the right direction.
Yeah.
But
my dad was an actor. In fact, he was in Scorsese's first movie, but then
really
he did plays as well. And so I got to do a few plays with him. I wasn't in anything major, but like he did, I think, one of those Irish Italian comedy wedding shows where they interact with like a dinner theater thing. I think I played the ring bearer in one of them as a very young man, so I did little parts like that.
You were Frodo.
That's right.
And
do a little crossover there.
Even a dedicated bench to your father.
Yes, if you go to the Long Beach Boardwalk by Magnolia, there is a bench in my father's name. It has the acting. I forget what you call that, but it's got like the happy face and the sad face, like the comedy and the tragedy.
Yes. Yeah.
got that with
That's
his
beautiful.
date's birth, his birth date and the year that he died.
That's a beautiful tribute.
Yeah.
And he really did it. I have great admiration for people that do that. It's remarkable, and how sharing, how generous people are. And I've really got even to watch people that I look and say, oh God, really they're talented. And they go through, I don't know if I can do this or whatever. So it's really an eye opener. And people that you look at and you say at anything and they say, wow, they're amazingly talented. And they must have everything together and do everything. It's like, even they have that thing too, which is why I'd say that, whatever it is, any of us are capable of doing whatever it is. And nobody is out there being perfect at it all the time. Everybody else has the same worries and stage fright or writing fright or whatever it is. It's like, just go and do it.
Sometimes we just gotta go and do it. Absolutely right.
Yeah. Why not? Why not you? Why not any of us?
That's right.
That always reminds me of that Jay-Z quote.
Which one?
Far from a Harvard student,
Oh,
just had the
yes.
balls to do it.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's
It's true.
it's about having the guts to go ahead and do it.
It's true, and nothing really prepares you for these things.
Right.
Nothing really does. But you know what? Everybody else started pretty much winging it also, and that's been pretty much the story of everything I've done. It's like, do you have any experience in this job as we interview? He's like, no, I don't.
Right. Like we're trying to wing this podcast over here, and every week we put out content, we put out polls. We put a poll last week asking about if we thought there should be a wealth tax on millionaires and billionaires. Now, my poll broke down pretty interestingly. It was 80% yes, 20% no. So most people on mine thought that there should, in fact, be a wealth tax. How about yours?
Mine was 75-25.
Okay, so
that there should be a wealth tax on millionaires and billionaires.
right.
And that comes from the report that Oxfam put out about a week or so ago, and they called for a 5% annual tax on billionaires and a 2.5% annual tax on millionaires. And that they said it would bring in about $2.5 trillion a year in tax revenue. So yeah, that's where that came from. Now we said, that might be one way, but closing the tax loopholes in the first place would bring in the tax revenue that we're missing out.
Let's get the income tax that we're not collecting. Right. That's what do.
Absolutely. It's not even so much of anything what you make, it's what you net, what you bring in.
Right.
I think also what you gentlemen are speaking to also speaks to the idea of fairness of people pulling their weight.
Right.
And I've seen things where people said, you know what, it really doesn't make any difference dollars wise, whether you tax the wealthy properly or not. But I think it really is that idea of everybody's paying their fair share. Everybody is contributing, because otherwise, let's face it, all those down here paying taxes and taxes are looking at people who pay no tax and go, wait a second, why am I buying into this at all? So it really even more than the dollars, the cents, the pennies is that psychological thing, and that kind of unit cohesion on a larger sense. So interesting.
And I've seen in articles where part of the credit for getting out of the Great Depression was the tax on the ultra wealthy. That because during that time, millionaires, if you're making over, I think it was over $1 million, there was like for those monies, like upwards of 80-90% tax rate on those things.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not even talking about that high. We're talking about just pay what you're supposed to be paying. Not 80-90% is kind of ridiculous sounding to me, but that's kind of what helped bring about change, I guess.
Even as recently as the Eisenhower administration, your top tax bracket was much higher than it is now.
Yeah, much higher. And they're talking what, 35%, 30% is what they're just trying to get them to pay that.
Right. I would say that for each of us, probably our own tax bracket is about 30% of what we make. I mean, anybody out there, just open your paycheck, take a look, say, huh. I don't remember being at the job interview. Not really.
So,
wow.
But people are in favor of it, so I don't know. Who knows if that'll happen or not? But
it is about fairness. I think that's what we're all driving at here. We have our different ideas as to how to achieve that, but that's the goal. Along those same lines, we talked about gun regulation, what should be done, if anything, about the availability of guns in the streets and out in society.
Mhm.
Of course, we had a series of tragic shootings, mass shootings, some of the most deadliest in American history. And so a lot of people are tired of the same song and dance every single time, to make a theater reference. It's T's and P's, thoughts and prayers, but what gets done? Nothing ever really gets done about it. And people are very frustrated about this. So we put out a video. We wanted to see what people thought. It was a clip from last week's show. And of course, open for comments. We got some very interesting comments on here from people on all sides of the spectrum. We had Lixa saying, I think we need to secure the schools and tackle mental health in this country. We had Jay saying, constitutional concealed carry, it's my right, it will save lives. You have Ron talking about, this was an interesting comment. He was talking about massacres that have occurred, or violence that has occurred with weapons that were not guns. But I feel like he was reaching a little bit for his examples, because he brought up Happy Land Social Club in I'm not sure what year that was. I think that was the 90s. But he said there was a fire that killed 87 people after an argument with the perpetrator's girlfriend. Oh, in the 80s, he says. Then he talks about McVeigh and Oklahoma bombing, of course, the Boston Marathon bomber. He's talking about there was someone with a sword in England in the last few years that went on a killing spree. And I believe he also, was it him or someone else? Yeah, it was him. Later on in his comment, he says, as of 2019, it is thought that almost 400 killings per month are being attributed to machetes in England. Is that true? That seems like a stretch to me. 400 killings a month with machetes in England?
I don't know. I'd have to verify that.
That does seem like a stretch. Yeah.
It does seem like a stretch, but it also seemed like he was reaching. I mean, not to discredit this guy, I appreciate the comment, but he's picking very high profile cases in history. It kind of proves the point that most of the damage is being done with guns here.
Well, that's also the tool that's used. As a matter of fact, my best friend's sister was a 999 operator in England, and she was on the line the last time they had a mass shooting in England, which I'm going to say was at least in the 90s, or if not earlier.
Yeah.
And I believe it was about 9 people were killed. And she talks about your brief. It's a 911 operator, what will be here in the States, is to stay on the line with the person until help arrives, or frankly, they die and help is no longer needed. And so she had to stay on the line while these people were dying. And she said she will never forget that. But I will point out that that was the last mass shooting they had. And let's face it, a gun is a tool. Yes, are people going to kill people? Sure. If it's a rock, a bow and arrow, whatever. But it's the tool that makes it easier. You can hit a nail with a hammer, great, and nothing's going to stop you. You want to hit it with your head or whatever, nothing's going to stop you. But you can lay down God knows how many nails with a nail gun, bap, 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 something. And, why make it easier for the people who want to do that?
Right.
With
Absolutely.
a weapon that will carry a large magazine, have a high rate of fire, things like that. It's like, damn it, if you want to kill people, all right, I maybe can't stop that, but I'm not going to make it easier for you either.
Right. And also, I always make the point that it's about availability, because I always see people say that the gun laws will only affect people who follow the law, but that's not the case. It's about the amount of guns floating around. And you could do an exercise. Look at the guns that are used in crimes in New York. They almost all come from out of state, and they come from states where it's easier to get the guns. So the laws are obviously making a difference here.
Right.
The guns are not native New Yorkers. We need to really be aware of that.
It's also tends to be an all or nothing argument that people say, oh, they're going to take away all the guns. First of all, if it hasn't happened by now, I doubt it's really going to happen. But we're not even talking about that. Plus, it's if you outlaw the guns, only outlaws will have them. We didn't say, well, we know people are going to murder people, so let's not have any murder laws, or let's not have any speeding laws because people are just going to go over it anyway. I look at it this way. It's like, no, it's not an all or nothing. It's not take every gun away, whatever. But like anything, like driving a car, we restrict that to people of a certain age. We restrict that to people who have passed a test, who've, paid for insurance, paid for, they must have safety inspection. They must have their license renewed. Why? Because, well, a car isn't built for killing people. A gun is, and it's a tool. That's what it's made for. It's designed very well for that. It does its job. But because of that potential damage, so we restrict those things. The same reason why you can't in New York State go into a bar and buy liquor below the age of 21. So we need to really stop going to these yelling extremes and these frankly talking points that a lot of people throw out there because it's very profitable. Every time there's a mass shooting, gun sales go up. And it's very profitable. People have an issue saying, I'm going to protect your right to guns. They don't really care. It's the money flowing in. But let's talk about, let's meet in the middle someplace and say, well, wait a second. You know what? Maybe we can restrict, just like we restrict people from having a car to having a tank. Maybe we can restrict at least what kind of weaponry can be put in people's hands.
Absolutely.
This high power thing, or we say, well, you know what? Why restrict it? Let them have hand grenades. Let them have bazookas. Like, if you want to go with that argument.
I've made that point as well. The Second Amendment is not unlimited. Everyone agrees.
Right.
Yeah.
People,
and people would say, wait a second. That's not a good idea. It's like, you need a license and a certification, by the way, to handle dynamite. But it's not, let's ban dynamite. It's like, no, we have certain restrictions. We have qualifications on those things, and a gun too. And frankly, if you're going to have a gun, if you're going to use a gun, you should also have training and safety and so forth, because it's not like TV. It's not a toy.
Right.
You point at, you fire it. It will put a hole in something.
Right.
Or somebody.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's not a thing to be taken lightly, like it's some kind of plaything or just a fantasy object.
Right.
If you think that's the truth and you don't know, you might be pointing the barrel in the wrong direction.
When you say training and whatnot, oftentimes, or at least sometimes, people come up with the comparison as far as here in Japan. In general, the cops don't even carry guns, and most people don't have one, haven't seen one. You can get a gun for hunting, but to get a gun, there's a pretty rigorous process to do it. You have to take a class. You have to meet with the police and have a course with the police. And, there's all these different things you have to go through. And it's not like you can go in and buy it and then, you've got it that day. There's no gun show type of loophole type of thing. It takes some time. You have to be training. You have to be,
Right.
go through the ringer.
And I think anybody who has a gun or, knows about firearms, like, of course, it's like you have a car. Would you give your keys to your kid without any training, without any guidance, without a license, whatever, and say, okay, go ahead and drive? No,
Right.
Because as a responsible person,
Right.
you're thinking, well, I don't want them to hurt themselves or somebody else. The same type of things. Like, nobody's coming to take all your guns.
Well,
If
it's
you're
not
comfortable having a gun, great. But we're just talking about, let's just keep the military grade hardware out of people who might be mentally unbalanced. Because again, if you're mentally unbalanced and you're by yourself, say, great, whatever, go around punching people, but you can only do so much damage. But if you're mentally unbalanced and you have a firearm, it's like being mentally unbalanced and having a nail gun. It's just, you can just keep popping them off.
Right. Alexis says, I have the right to bear arms as well as protect my home. Children 18 should not be able to purchase, I think she means under 18, should not be able to purchase weapons. I went through an extensive background check, which took hours to be cleared in the state of Pennsylvania. As most state, you feel you should be 21 to purchase any weapon. I'm not sure what she means by that. You feel you should be 21 to purchase. I think she means you should be 21 to purchase a weapon.
Or most states feel.
Sounds like it.
But exactly, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Here's a person who has a gun, who has it for a purpose, but will also agree, it's like, yeah, it's a good idea to have these things, not just let anybody walk around and get one.
Right.
And
Carol says, I saw this story on TV, very compelling. USA, please make it happen. She's speaking to what happened in Australia, where they had very swift gun regulation after massacre there. DJ Satane says it's not even fair to attempt to compare this to Australia. Further, police do not have to have the duty to protect you unless you are in their custody. That's why we have gun rights in the USA. Okay.
I think people on that side like to cite that a lot. And I think it stems from, I believe there was a court case in the past few years where the judge ruled that the police didn't have a duty to step in and protect you. There was a court case. And so a lot of these guys cite that and reasons why, okay, well, I need to have my gun. And I don't remember the name of the case or whatever it was, but it was something in the news in the past couple of years. So that comes up often.
Right. It seems like one of those talking points that keeps being repeated.
Right, right.
It's
I don't
a
know if it was a
thing.
major case or what, but it was, yeah, it was something that came up, and that was what the judge ruled.
And people do talk about, I want to be able to defend my home, things like that, and that's understandable, certainly understandable. Then again, I don't know if you need a street sweeper, if somebody's coming through your door. That's
Right.
probably
And
not the weapon you need.
we've had a ban before on assault rifles. It's not a new thing, and they
Exactly.
saw I think, like 46%, drop in mass shootings when we had that during what Clinton enacted that.
I'm sure law enforcement would not be unhappy about going into a situation where they got to think, are we going to be outgunned?
Right.
I mean, if you, for instance, don't have a ban on armor-piercing bullets,
Right.
why would you even allow that? Let's face it, cops wear bulletproof vests, but there is ammunition that will go through that. So it's like, why is that even on the table?
It's also worth mentioning that people bring up the right to have a gun to protect their homes. And yes, that is a right, but more often than people using those guns to protect their homes, are those guns actually used in domestic violence situations or on people in their own homes.
Suicides are very high.
Right.
Accidental deaths are very high. It's a well-known thing in law enforcement that if you get murdered, the most likely person who murdered you is not somebody who's wandering down the street, but somebody you know closely.
Absolutely.
It's just a thing. And then again, there's the tool to do that with.
Right.
And how many accidental shootings?
Well, speaking on that, there's been at least 8 more mass shootings since the Uvalde shooting. So just this past week. So
yeah, it's amazing. I heard the stat the other day, and it said at this point, we've had more mass shootings this year than we have had days in this year. And if you think about it, it's horrifying in a larger sense, but if you take it down to a smaller sense, is that bullet rips through a body, a small body. The children in Uvalde, I just heard, a lot of them were so eviscerated by gunfire that they couldn't identify their remains. They have to do it through DNA. So it's not it's, oh, well, 10 here died there, 12 there, 12 there. It's not just the number. And the question is, how many? How many are we willing to sacrifice, say, oh, well, that's the way things go, before we're willing to sit down and say, okay, let's cut the crap and let's come to some common sense agreements and start there. And
Right.
stop yelling.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That's the nuance that this discussion needs. James in the chat says, I think you can kill less people with a sword than with a gun. That's true. You can certainly kill people quicker with a gun. So if you were to call the cops on someone with a sword, I think you could stop the damage from being done sooner than you would someone
at a greater distance too.
Exactly.
At a greater distance, which allows you to be taken down. Let's face it.
Exactly.
Killing somebody with a sword or knife is very messy.
And when people talk about you need a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun, well, there were reports of police being afraid, or people being afraid to stop this gentleman or this person in Texas because he had a semi-automatic weapon and they were afraid of being outgunned. So.
Well, I also look at this. Somebody brought this up the other night. We were discussing it, and we were in a restaurant. I said, "Oh, great. Neither you nor I have had military training. Neither one of you or I have had law enforcement training, or been in a situation in a fire situation. Suppose somebody got up in this restaurant and started shooting. Are you, as a civilian, going to get up, draw your weapon, find out where the bad guy is, point him out, and just in the midst of all this, while you're being shot at, by the way, because that's part of your training also, you're going to be able to stand up in this chaos, and the bad guy, because he's going to be wearing a black hat, obviously, you're going to find him and you're going to pick him off with a shot without hitting anybody else. Like, are you going to be able to do that? Am I going to trust you as a civilian to be able to do that? It's like, oh, hell no. And then suppose it's a larger crowd or a theater. It's unfortunately, even police run into this. It's almost a fantasy that a good guy with a gun is going to stop a bad guy with a gun.
It's like a movie.
Think about the reality, or the reality of any chaos situation, a fire, something goes wrong in a concert, people start stampeding. How are you going to pick out the one person there? And by the way, get a clear shot. of a person that far, because your target is smaller and smaller and smaller, but you're going to hit that. You're going to be
Right.
level-headed enough, and while
Right.
somebody's shooting at you possibly, or blood spurting everywhere, you're going to do that. It's like, nah, you know what?
What happened in the Walmart shooting a few years back, where there was so much chaos. People said they had guns, but they couldn't even figure out who the bad guy was or where he was. Everything was so loud and chaotic and noisy.
Sure.
You don't have a clear view all the time and clear vision and clear mind. It's
you have all these people
crazy
running
situation.
around, and for all you know, anybody could be, quote, the bad guy. You
Right.
don't know who that is. You can't find them.
Right.
Were you a trained
Yeah.
sniper? I don't think so.
And now you have people shooting at each other. If you're just witnessing this, how do you know who initiated? Who's the aggressor here?
That's right. You stand up with a gun, and then everybody's looking at you.
Right.
Somebody
Right.
else.
And
has
then
a
the cops
firearm,
show
like,
up.
There's the guy.
Yeah, the cops show up. You got a gun. It's an active situation. They don't have time for that explanation at that point.
You could be picked off right there.
That's right.
And
But the fact
that's
is, it doesn't. People like to throw out scenarios, and the one thing I always say is like, it's possible, but
Yeah.
show me with numbers how many times that has actually happened. Let's see about
right.
possible. Let's go from the possible, the potential, to the reality. Has it happened? And I'd say in
Right.
a situation like that, I mean, even police and military have to have specific training to be in such a situation. And as we see, sometimes that training doesn't always work. I mean, when I worked at Kennedy Airport, we were trained in an active shooter situation, and our training was basically get the hell out of the way, duck, hide, and stay out of the way of the people, the professionals who are dealing with it. So
Right.
that's
And
about
now-
the extended training all of us get.
And Cruz was Ted Cruz and other people that are on that side keep bringing up this idea of arming teachers. And like, it just, how does that make any kind of sense? Like, now the teacher is also, their duty is to be the actual bodyguard in an active shooter, to be a soldier in an active shooter situation.
Yeah.
And like, it makes no kind of sense.
And by the way,
Wouldn't even go in and deal with it. You want the teacher, your math teacher, to take out their gun and be like, all right, I got
the days in school where there's no shooting, what that does psychologically to the teacher and to the students who are sitting there in that situation, because they're aware of it. They know that their teacher has a gun to protect them, and they probably see the gun. There's probably drills where they're hiding under the desks or what have you. I mean, what does that do to the kids,
Yeah.
in their development?
Yeah, I know a lot of teachers. I don't think any of them would say, "Oh yeah, I'm also going to be a paramilitary person." A couple of points I heard about that, and one's like, "What are you going to be paying these teachers? You're not even paying them to have books. Where is this money for the firearms, the ammunition, and the training going to come from?" And I always say is that, look, if you're at war with somebody, and they're already in your country, and your teachers are your first and last line of defense, I think you already lost. It's like, why are you even letting them get to the door? Why are you even letting them have a weapon capable of doing this? Like, no, that's not what. And I did see recently a teacher post like, you know what? Yeah, okay. Suppose I have a gun. Kids are very good at finding stuff. Kids are very good at getting stuff. It's like, so I've got to also watch that gun every time. And what happens to it? Do I take it home? Do I lock it up? Do I leave it at school? And bottom line is like, we're not even paying for them to have books and pencils and things. They got to go out and buy them themselves. Who's going to pay for the guns? Who's going to do that?
Imagine that. Yeah, we were always fighting about teachers having supplies for the classroom, actual school supplies, and it's got to come out of their own pockets too much of the time. Then you hear about the city cutting the program that reimburses them. So they're not even getting their supplies paid for. Would we be asking them to pay for guns and bullets to protect their students? That's awful.
Yeah. Well, if you think about in New York City, especially, that we're looking at an increase in crime. We really are. So imagine if the mayor and the city council came out tomorrow and they said, well, we're not going to crack down on crime and criminals. We're going to encourage every New Yorker to start putting bricks around their houses and their windows. And, and have a basically a machine gun nest in the living room. So imagine how that would go. It's like, we're not going to bother, cutting off crime, the ability of criminals to do their thing. We're going to lay that on you. And it's your fault, by the way, if it doesn't happen. If you have more than one entrance to your house, that's on you, because you should have done a better job.
Yeah. And now we're going to also install an armory in PS 119. So
Exactly.
Some of these arguments you hear don't seem like they're made in good faith to me. And I think that's a
They're not.
problem with the larger conversation in our political discourse. And Dan, of course, you are a journalist. And so we wanted to talk about the freedom of the press and where that meets accountability and people's obligations to be truthful. Because obviously the First Amendment is not unlimited and you're not allowed to defame people, but sometimes these interests are at tension with each other. And so I announced, and it's been made public, I filed a $10 million lawsuit against the Daily News and one of its reporters on behalf of a client. Now, this client was running for city council last year, and there were 3 Daily News articles about him, which frankly were full of lies. And the reporter was put on notice. He had ample notice that what he was reporting was not true, but he ignored all of that evidence and continued to present these lies, and very nasty lies, by the way. They depicted him as being a sexist who joked about rape, basically a pro-rape guy. It was really ridiculous what they were writing about him, and also a racist, of course. No, but they didn't just characterize him with these adjectives. They made up stories to fit this narrative, and they outright lied about the events. And even there was a quote that they said that he said, which they took from his Facebook page, but it was really the opposite of what he said. And you could look at what he wrote on Facebook and compare it to what was in the article, and it's this. Some of the words are in there, but the meaning of it was the complete opposite. So that you can tell it came from this quote, but you changed the meaning. So I think we need to hold journalists and media outlets accountable for when they do this, because it really is poisoning our discourse, and it's causing people to lose faith in our institutions. And of course, it makes it harder for public servants, good people, to represent the community, and it also makes people lose faith in a system to the point where they're not going to want to step up and run if they think they'll be subjected to something like this too. So it's a real problem that needs to be addressed. But of course, you do have the freedom of the press to keep in mind as well. You have cases like New York Times v. Sullivan, which grants broad leeway to the press. But again, all we're saying is, yes, of course, use your First Amendment right to report, but don't lie, don't fabricate stories, don't defame people. I mean, that should be easy enough, right?
Well, it's a difficult question, because on the other hand, there are people who would use something like that, and we talked about basically lawsuits, things like that. And then I'm not talking about this case, but those type of punitive measures to keep the press from reporting on things, or to kind of put that chills, like, don't even go near this topic because somebody will keep you in court for ages. That's a fact. And there are some things, you open up things now and you see revelations about different things going on, which, if you think it was like, if we did not have a free press, these stories would never come out. There were things that politicians are doing or saying that of course you'd never hear about that. But I would say that as you say, it is important for journalists, for the media, to be responsible as the baseline of anything. Let me think. Well, I did some newspapers in college, and actually almost 10 years ago, when Hurricane Sandy swept through, I got swept into doing journalism full time for the Wave newspaper in Rockaway first, and now I freelance for the Rockaway Times, and I've done that. And to me, being dishonest or being biased, it's not a good idea. Way back when I was in college, and a reporter came down, I'm going to say maybe from Newsday, maybe Long Island Press at the time. And so I was working on the newspaper then, and with the journalism class. And of course, I'll talk to anybody and talk about anything. And then he went away, and I said, okay, we probably left him with a pretty good impression. And the article he wrote was like something about me being a burnout, and and students are just so disinterested. And I thought, wait, he came in with a story already in his head, and he just filled in the blanks with whatever we said. And well, let me put it this way. One of the best comments I've gotten as a journalist over all this time, and God knows how many hundreds and hundreds of articles, is somebody came up to me and said, you know what? When I read your stories, I don't know what your opinion is. I don't see you in the story. You lay it out and then let people read and figure it out for themselves. And I realized, yeah, I mean, unless you're doing an editorial or something that specifically says editorial, it's like, yeah, your bias should not be in those stories, or in the editing, or in the layout or the design, where let's say you support a certain political point of view or candidate. No, that candidate's picture should not be bigger than everybody else's. There are times when, you know, I will talk to people because I want to hear their experience. I want to hear their point of view. That makes me a more rounded person personally and then professionally. But I will, you know, and I think it's incumbent to kind of bend over sideways to, number one, be objective, be factual, and C is to, if you have to, bend over sideways to make sure that you are not favoring one over the other. Because if you do, well, let me put it this way. We have, what, 3 newspapers left in New York? The New York Times, the Daily News, and the Post. The Times is a toss-up whether you want to, you know, go with or not. But the Daily News and the New York Post are so slanted that nobody takes them seriously. If either one of them came out with the biggest story in the world tomorrow, everybody looking saying, no, because
enough people do though. I don't think we should say nobody does, because
well, that's true.
stories do make a difference in the way people are perceived. And you know what? Sometimes it's not even the story; it's the headline. Because what they'll do is they'll write a headline, and it's often a very sensational headline, but then they'll post the article on their social media pages. And nowadays, the social media and the website get more views than the actual paper does. They'll put the stuff online, and they know that a lot of people are not going to read the full article because everything is so fast on social media, especially.
It's clickbait.
So, right. And there's case law that says that headlines themselves are actionable if they tell a certain story, if they depict, especially if they're implying certain facts that are not true.
Yes.
So that's what we saw here. Sometimes you would read the article, and I'm talking about my Daily News case. You would read the article, and some of the reporting in the article contradicts what's in the headline, which shows you that the reporter knew what he was doing, right?
Absolutely.
It's not that he made an innocent mistake. He purposely set this up to create this depiction of this person. And that's really sad. I mean, I think that's what we need to be stopping.
And I would say what's further sad is, like, all right, let's say a reporter is going to write something up. Now, first of all, he doesn't get these stories out of nowhere. He's got to have those approved. You know, do you want me to cover this or not? But then it's a further failure of an editor at any level, assistant editor, an editor, a publisher, to say, wait a second, hold on, because, you know, in a larger scheme of things, that's their business. And you may have, you know, these twiddling nonsense stories, but it affects the overall perception of that business. The unfortunate thing is that part of media today is entertainment. And unfortunately, it's like, wow, if we say this nonsense, we push this big lie or that big lie, we'll get better ratings. And the rest is out the window.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean,
You have an obligation.
yeah, at some point there was this idea, as far as news is concerned, and news media, it went from the idea of, you know, to inform to entertain. And I think that's where we're more at right now, is more that infotainment type of idea. And it probably, you know, people do credit or blame the 24-hour news cycle type of channels, because they constantly need something, some kind of topic, some kind of content, because they got 24 hours to fill.
Yeah, and it's not new. It goes back, you know, at least into the early 20th century, at least, with, you know, Hearst Publications basically either covering or not covering anything that that Mr. Hearst did or didn't want to do, or creating situations where, for instance, the U.S. got into the Spanish-American War based on that slant of journalism. That's where the phrase yellow journalism comes from.
Right.
The other unfortunate thing is now other people can pick it up, and let's say there's a politician who's not dealing on the level, and you report a fact about that person, and they can say, oh, that's fake news. That's fake news. And since people are now, from experiences, you know, at least shy of the biased media that they're getting, which is often not clearly labeled to separate editorial opinion versus fact, is they're willing to say, oh, yeah, that's shady news media. We need to do something about them.
Right. But on the flip side, because you have this fake news label out there, and a lot of people don't believe anything that person says, they will now think that all the news is legitimate and there's no such thing as news that's not, because we don't want to look like we're saying that there's fake news. Obviously, somewhere in the middle, there is reporting out there that is not legitimate and is full of fabrications.
Absolutely. There were studies that showed that, people who solely watch Fox News were less informed than people who watch other news. I mean, it's like, I don't know, that the rest of the world sees it. They see, especially when we're talking about that specific network, news network, they see that it's a joke. It's misinforming. It's telling blatant falsehoods. And, people around the world are looking at that like, so what is wrong with you guys over there in America?
And it's not,
Go ahead, Dan.
years ago, I worked with a colleague when I worked for Time Warner Cable, and it was great because we had people from everywhere. And he said, I don't really watch local news, U.S. news much. He said, what I do like to watch BBC, pick up the Financial Times. Actually, I used to nick his copy when he was done with it. And he said, because you get a different view. Anybody, you turn on the BBC, they have presenters. They don't have newscasters with hair and everything. It's like their job is to read the news. And I've actually watched it and different things like that and said, wait, that's a story that affects the US. I heard nothing about that. Probably because they were covering the biggest celebrity or whatever.
Right.
And it's a different perspective. And again, we're not, because of all this other nonsense, we're not getting the news that we should. We're not. And then they move on. And I saw that after Hurricane Sandy. I had the experience of working and living locally in the community that was still devastated. And because I was out of home, living elsewhere. And so I would see the news on TV and they would cover like a little tiny keyhole of what was going on and saying, this is a big story. This is as visual as you can get, because people always complain it's not visual for television. Why aren't you covering it? Oh, because we're on to celebrity A or celebrity B or W doing their thing. And it's
Johnny Depp and the Amber Heard divorce trial or whatever that is.
right, exactly. Which I look and say, what my mother told me, is like, it's none of my business really. It's it's
Right.
interesting, but it's not.
I want to put the poll out there for our viewers. So every week we throw a poll question out. And this week we wanted to ask, should media outlets and journalists be held to account for reporting false information?
I think we should probably qualify that for blatantly reporting false information, because they could potentially report false information by mistake.
Right. And that's also the standard. It's a good point to raise when you're reporting on a public figure. And this goes to Dan's point about a politician or someone who's in the public trying to stifle negative reporting by saying, I'll just sue you. When you're reporting on a public figure, there is a higher standard that must be met if you're trying to sue, right?
Because to intent.
Exactly right. So there's an actual malice standard that was created, which is knowledge or recklessness. So either you knew or you consciously disregarded a substantial risk of it being false.
Absolutely.
So normally, if you're just a private person suing for defamation, there's a negligence standard, which is they just should have known better. But if you're in the public, if you voluntarily put yourself in the public, you kind of sign up for a certain level of criticism. And so in order to recover for defamation, you have to show the person either knew or was reckless as to what they were reporting.
Yeah. And that's a good standard too, to kind of keep those lines clear as to, again, an all or nothing. Yeah. So
right.
I wanted to bring kind of another point off of that, and Dan, you mentioned as far as reading the news and that there was no opinion from the writer in it, and it should be kind of basically, an informative type of piece and balanced in that way. So one of the things media got criticized for after the Trump win was how media tried to play that fair game with Trump and putting him on the same level as a Hillary or the other politicians, when he was clearly not their level. His antics were not the norm and not things.
Yeah.
So in that situation, how does that work? If, we've got a guy who's clearly over the line and they're trying to treat him the same as everyone else, and it worked in his favor to the rest of our detriment.
Him, right? It made him kind of like how we were talking about in the past about some of these fringe views have become mainstream by the way they're presented. And that's the same what we would normally consider to be a fringe candidate, right? If they're presented
Oh.
in a certain light. But when it comes to the law, there's a difference between what's fact and what's opinion. So an opinion is always protected by the First Amendment if it's a pure opinion. The problem is a lot of times you have what's called a mixed opinion, which is something that looks like an opinion on its face, but it's really implying a fact, and that fact might not be true. So, for example, calling someone a sexist, well, okay, that could be an opinion, but what if you look into it and there's context there that suggests they did or said something that another person would believe them to be sexist? If it suggests certain facts, then you can have a cause of action based on those facts that are being suggested, which may not be true. But as far as your question goes about should they normalize, I guess that's a little bit separate. That just speaks to maybe journalistic ethics, right? More so than reporting
Yeah.
opinions.
And I think basically basic operations. I think part of the problem with a lot of things is that we we tend to look at the last case scenario or whatever, and we're it's almost like we're trying to figure out, well, what is it? What's going on here? It's like the fact is you have to be able to adjust. You have to, I always love when they say, well, so-and-so is breaking norms. It's like, what are you even talking about? Like as if this is not a possibility of somebody to do, because it's never been done before. And I think a lot of the media was trying to seem unbiased, but at the same time going overboard. And at the same time, it's like just not figuring out what is your reality right now, and call it what it is. But rather than I think he's a dirtbag. Use facts to state your case, if that's what you think. And then, don't say, let's talk about a false equivalency. It's not balanced as used to be required under legislation, where you had to balance your reporting. Yeah, the fairness doctrine, which is gone. But they love to put this kind of both sides thing. And here's a raving maniac, and here's the same person. But they both have valid points of view. It's like you kind of have to make that in your head say, well, that's not so.
Right.
But
like
then show your case.
There were very fine people on both sides, right? That was
Exactly, which is not the case. And as an objective observer, you've got to be able to call that. And you've got to have the credibility to do that. And you have to have the facts back it up and say, no, wait a second, hold on. This is not all things being equal. This is not like the last 90 candidates or 100 and some odd presidents, and show what's going on. Because otherwise, exactly, as you say, it legitimizes certain things that should never be. And then you finally getting around to calling a lie, and it's too late. And by the way, it's paved the way, not for that person, but the next smarter person who's going to come and try and do that is going to have a much easier time, because you already put it into acceptance that this, that's fine if people lie.
On the flip side, there will be people who say that if you don't editorialize in that way, or I guess I should say, if you don't present both sides of every issue, then you are picking a side, and you are not reporting the news. You're just being an editorialist.
That's a fair point. But again, there too, whatever you're going to do it factually, rather than say, again, there are fine people on both sides of this issue. The facts, I don't think would support that. Be honest.
Right.
Be honest. And yes, keep yourself from, listen, whatever my biases or whatever it is, they don't really belong in any news article, as far as I'm concerned. But I am obligated to, even at a local level, check my facts, make sure I've got things straight, and then go forward and report it as evenly as possible.
And that's a very good point also, speaking from a legal perspective. When it comes to fact-checking sources, again, there's a higher bar to recovery for a public figure, and a reporter might not ordinarily be legally obligated to fact-check sources, but an obligation arises when that reporter has information that would make him or her doubt the veracity of the sources, or doubt the truthfulness of them. For example, in our case, this person, my client, gave the reporter tons of information. Look, I made all these Facebook posts showing my true opinions and where I really stand. How are you going to present this other fabrication? It's not true. So once that information is given to the reporter then does have a duty to look into it. They can't just ignore it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's there are ethics involved in any job. I've worked for very small companies, and I've worked for one of the largest companies in the world. And every aspect of the job, ethics is involved. Working in good faith, and yes, catching yourself before doing anything that might be damaging. And frankly, all the people above you and below you should be doing the same thing. Same thing with journalism. Oh yeah, if there is something that, wait a second, that contradicts, you have the obligation to look into that and see what that, as if you were, well, if you were doing a criminal case, investigating a criminal case, if there's some evidence or witness that contradicts the story, yeah, you're obligated to look into that. And if you find it doesn't, it's not have any bearing, or it's not true, that's one thing. If you decide to ignore that, no, that's not ethical at all. And how fair is that to the readers? Because now you're treating them like idiots.
Some people don't want the facts to get in the way of a good story, and that's a shame.
Right. I think that speaks to
Yes.
what you were saying earlier, Dan, when the person went into that story you were talking about. They went in with an idea that they wanted to present,
Mhm.
instead of going in and looking at, okay, what's just happening here. Right. The facts can lead you whatever way it is, and then you're supposed to report that, instead of being like, okay, well, I want the story to be this, and then I'm going to disregard what contradicts what
Yes.
I want it to be.
Yes.
And then that's a major problem.
And there's a difference between, you and I can go to an event. We both might come away with, say, somebody speaking. We both might come away with what the main point is, or the thrust of the thing. That's possible. That's possible.
Right.
That does happen. But that's far different than coming and saying, I've got a pretty clear idea of what I'm going to write on, what view I want to present and not. And yeah,
Right.
this person, I felt in all honesty, is like, well, gee, you already came in with your idea that you want to write about college students being burnouts, and you didn't even necessarily even need us.
Here's a perfect example of this. I came across this piece on the internet, and it was from last October, but I didn't catch it until now. And it talks about me in a way that is, quite frankly, unfair and not true. But something I found on here, just to give you a brief summary of it. This guy says, unwilling to expand the electorate or build far-reaching progressive coalitions to stymie the fear-mongering of the Queen's GOP, Scala and other Democrats were doomed to keep repeating their same mistakes. In doing so, many large swaths of potential voters in the district's north were largely shut out of the political process due to a lack of good faith outreach. Now that's insulting. I mean, Jay, you know this. We did nothing but build coalitions throughout the district, throughout South Queens, and a lack of good faith outreach to the north of the district. I mean, you want to talk about the food pantries that we did. I helped set up the civilian patrol in Ozone Park, working with families in Woodhaven. There was a boy who was essentially molested, and then we're going to give the perpetrator a misdemeanor. I worked with the family to put pressure on the prosecutor to up that to a felony charge. I mean, we did so much work throughout the district. I spent my entire time in public service trying to build these coalitions. So to write something, I was unwilling to build a coalition, and there was no good faith outreach to people in the North. I mean, that's just a narrative that they're trying to make. And the funny thing is, this came out in October. They were trying to say that the Democratic nominee was going to win with such a great victory by doing it differently, and ended up doing much worse than I did. So obviously their narrative is a false one, but
Let me turn that around, because I like to look at things as not just the person say on the inside, but also turn around and say, what is it like as a customer, a viewer, a reader?
Right.
Now, presume I know nothing about the efforts you've made. And a lot of them, again, that you give me now is like, oh, okay, I didn't know that before. But hearing that piece, and I'm going to assume that this is not in the editorial section. This is in a news story. As a reader, I have not heard one fact in there.
Right.
I've heard blather about he's a bad guy, which, hey, for all I know, it might be true, but I haven't heard of one fact in that entire first piece there. And I'd probably bet there isn't much inside to do that.
Now, was that a blog? Or was
fact
that a
because
news
they
story?
didn't have the fact to report.
Yeah, it's,
Was it
it's
a
like,
was that a
if you
blog,
want
a
to say
news
that,
story?
fine, but you stick that in your editorial section, where it's
Right.
clear that this is your
Yeah,
opinion.
I don't know
and
what
it's not
this
my view.
was. I don't think this was an actual newspaper. I think it was some kind of blog or something. So I guess it's this guy giving his opinion, but he's presenting it
Right.
as a story. He's not saying like this is just
Exactly.
my opinion. He's
If you're
presenting
presenting
like
as
an
a
article.
story, that's another thing entirely. And frankly, yeah, you do need to label those things too. Or
Right.
or
Just
let
read
people
like
know
an
you're just
article,
presenting
you're
your
presenting facts.
yeah.
And they're blatantly not true. I mean, refuse to build coalitions. That's all we've done. You know?
Well, hey,
Right.
I'm gonna say that writer. Give me a fact in there that shows that. A fact,
Right.
a few facts,
And I think-
real facts.
I think with the rise of bloggers and, you know, bloggers being able to reach credibility and far-reaching audiences, like I think there is also kind of a blurred line there when they're presenting stories like that, where it's like, okay, well, I'm just a blog. This is all opinion piece. This is all whatever I want it to be. I'm not under the same guise as a newspaper journalist. But then you also have bloggers who are big enough that are legitimate journalists that get national readership. And it's like, well, you know, where do you draw that line, or where do you see that, you know?
You
Listen,
have
something like this can come off like it's an opinion, but it's like what I said before. It's suggesting certain facts. It's suggesting I didn't do anything. Right? I didn't do the things that I did. And to that extent, it's factually not true. Now, maybe the reporter didn't have the information and he just went with what someone told him, but that's not responsible journalism either.
exactly at
Right.
whatever level in any situation you're dealing with the public. I
Right.
don't care if you're whatever working the counter at McDonald's or whatever it is, the head of a corporation, is you do have a responsibility to the public that you're serving. And if you're
Right.
writing something, you know, hey, listen, this is my little corner, I'm going to say what I want, that's one thing. But you also have to have that ethics there and that responsibility, because you're writing this for someone. Somebody out there you are writing it for. And otherwise, why are you writing it and putting it out there to begin with? You have to think about what is your responsibility to this person, to my audience, whoever that is. And it is a responsibility. And on the backs of that rides the responsibility of everything else. You know,
Exactly right.
if you're an idiot and an employee, I always used to use this example with my folks, is like, okay, you can be an idiot on your own. But the fact is, if you're in person, on the phone, whatever, representing this company, people don't think, oh, that's just one idiot, one individual. It's like, no, that reflects on everything, the company, the endeavor, the thing you're into. If you're a politician or a candidate, you know, if you're an idiot, it reflects on everybody else trying to do that job. If you're a journalist, it reflects on everybody else doing that job, who for the most part, like everything else, like law enforcement, like all these things, there's a lot of good people trying to do a lot of good work. But your whatever, indiscretion, stupidity, what you think the thing is about, that reflects on everybody else. And again, you know, why treat your readers, your viewers like idiots? Give them information, let them decide. You know, don't just ring a bell and wait for them to salivate.
Well, we only have a few minutes left.
Psychology.
Before we sign off, I wanted to give an update on the Dayton Beach Park case. It should be coming out in greater detail in the Rockaway papers this week, but this is kind of breaking news. A judge dismissed the case last week that the Dayton Beach Park board brought against HPD. Now, this gets a little bit complicated, but there hasn't been an election of directors at Dayton Beach Park, which is a co-op in the Rockaways, in many years now. And it goes back to a Department of investigation, which found that there was some foul play going on and there needed to be an audit to figure out who should vote and who shouldn't. The HPD was conducting this audit. The board of directors sued to challenge the way that the audit was being done, saying that their own methodology should be used. And they filed suit in Manhattan, and a Manhattan judge didn't really know what to do with it and put a stay on the election until they could kind of work through this. So what ended up happening is this was in October of 2018, and an injunction was issued, and it has blocked an election of directors ever since. Of course, we had COVID, things were all paused in the court system for a while. So there hasn't been an election, meaning the people who live at Dayton Beach Park, the shareholders, haven't been able to vote on who runs the co-op, who manages their co-op. And so the board has been able to rule the co-op with no checks against them by the residents. So I represented a group of shareholders who filed our own suit in Queens. And we said Queens was the appropriate venue for this because the Manhattan judge didn't really know what to do with it, which is putting everything on hold pending this long litigation process. We said, look, there have been instances of self-dealing by the board that need to be addressed, including this election being held up. And we said that Queens was the appropriate venue. So we had a venue battle. Should this be in Manhattan? Should it be in Queens? We won. So both cases now, which were marked related, were sent to Queens. Finally, the judge in Queens dismissed the board's case, which will now clear the path for an election to proceed. Now, it's very good news, but we shouldn't celebrate just yet because we still have to schedule an election and we still have to make sure that it's fairly contested, because this kind of puts us back in the spot we were initially before the board sued, where HPD was trying to figure out who was a valid shareholder for the purpose of the election and who wasn't. So our goal now is to make sure HPD does this in the proper way so that we have a valid accounting of the shareholders and we can have a fair election. But it is a good victory to report that since the case was moved to Queens, the Queens judge knew what to do with it, basically dismissed the board's case and opened the door for an election to be held. So good news there. We'll keep pressure on HPD, and hopefully before long, the people who live in Dayton Beach Park will be able to vote on their board for the first time in many years.
Yeah, and I would say, having seen enough of these board meetings and committee boards, like this, folks, for the most of us, like these are the nuts and bolts and the gears that make things happen or not happen. I know it's very wonky. It's like, well, what does that all mean? It's like basically Dayton Tower is like whether your garbage is being taken out, whether your lights are working. This is the minutia, the stuff that people actually go to and work at to make everything else work. That so you don't have to see it. No.
Right, the security, everything.
Exactly, or whether they're going to put another 6 buildings on your property. It's another story.
Yeah, or even things like, renovations or
Renovations.
and all that stuff. So it's very important that the people who live in these co-ops have the ability to vote.
Absolutely.
That's them on the board.
Or else somebody else is going to decide for you.
Exactly.
May not like the results.
More on that to come, but I wanted to put that out there as kind of breaking news. I know a lot of people have been waiting for a long time for this, and finally courts are back in session, things are moving, and we have some progress on the case.
I can't wait to read it in the Rockaway Times on Thursday morning.
There you go. Well, thank you for joining us, Dan.
A pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Dan, for coming out with us.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jay, from all four corners of the world. And it has been a pleasure. I'll be happy to come back anytime. And of course, thank you everybody who's signed on to the podcast this evening. It is great to, metaphorically speaking, see you all. Hope you're all staying cool.
Stay safe, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Be well. All right. Take care.